in part as a
Save these dates. Save these dates. February 19th through the 23rd, 2023. The West Coast Churches of Christ Annual Preachers and Leaders Forum returns to the Bay Area, hosted by the Bay North and McDonald Avenue congregations, to be held in Fairfield, California. Register now at www.wcplf.com. That's the West Coast Preachers and Leaders Forum. Good evening and welcome to the Gospel Truth. I'm Alan Jackson, bringing to you spiritual songs and hymns and the power of the spoken word of God. First of all, giving thanks to God Almighty for blessing me with this another opportunity to yet be on this time side of life and to have this another blessed privilege to come to you in His name by way of this television medium and to bring to you another message from His holy and divine word. And as I always do, I'd like to continue to express my appreciation and my gratitude to the production staff for their continued service to the gospel truth. And it is my prayer that God will continue to bless each one of them with those things that He knows that they are standing in need of as well. And then, of course, I'm praying on your behalf as participant observers. And it is my prayer that God will continue to bless you and your family with all of those things that He knows that you're standing in need of as well. And then, of course, I'm encouraging you to pray on my behalf because I'm also standing in need of prayer, and it's only God who can provide me with those things that I am standing in need of. Well, I certainly want to continue to welcome you to the Gospel Truth February 2023 tribute to Black American history. So to start this evening with a crash course on the Black Panther Party.
Hi, I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American History. In the history of the fight for Black liberation, there have been Black political organizations who have been around doing this work for decades. Organizations, for example, like the NAACP and the National Urban League, who were founded in the early 20th century and still exist today. And these groups, which have been in existence for over a century, have helped bring about some incredibly important policy changes when it comes to the civil and political rights of Black Americans, and have also served as platforms from which Black people can make their concerns known to the wider public. But sometimes, an organization doesn't have to have existed for a long time in order to have a huge impact on the history of this country. An example of that is the Black Panther Party. Founded in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, the Black Panther Party reached its peak just 4 years later in 1970. The organization had an impact on U.S. history and culture that far exceeded its relatively short lifespan and small membership. Let's take a look to understand why. Let's start with the Black Panther Party's origin story in the Thought Bubble. Originally known as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the organization started through the campus organizing of Seale and Newton. They met in Oakland, California in 1961, while they were both students at Merritt College. In the tense atmosphere following the 1965 assassination of Malcolm X, Newton, Seale, and other student activists organized the Black History Fact Group. The group was founded in part as a response to the university failing to acknowledge the role of African Americans in settling the American West in the 1800s. Among their goals was to urge the school to offer courses in Black history and to establish a Black Studies department. Newton and Seale also joined the college's sole Students Advisory Council, whose stated goal was to, quote, develop Black student leadership, advocate for a more inclusive curriculum, and to connect the university to the community. But disputes within the group would lead Newton and Seale to eventually resign. But their struggle to continue the work of Black radical political organizing didn't end there. Newton and Seale pivoted their goals. Rather than looking to join another political organization, form their own. Students of the teachings of Malcolm X, they founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, later known just as the Black Panther Party, in 1966, following the murder of unarmed teenager Matthew Johnson at the hands of San Francisco police. Thanks, Thought Bubble. According to historian Robin C. Spencer, Newton and Seal framed the tenets of their new organization around the belief that Black Americans were living in an internal colony within the larger mother country of the United States. Borrowing from Black nationalists and post-colonial movements of the time, they posited that the relationship between the Black colony and the mother country was, according to Spencer, one of pure exploitation of labor and resources. Therefore, they sought to liberate the Black colony through self-determination as a part of their larger goal to transform America and eventually the rest of the world. This aligned with their larger vision of correcting racial and class inequalities. Seal and Newton were also interested in how Black liberation struggles worldwide were interconnected to the struggles of Black Americans. They were avid readers of Marxist theory and studied anti-colonial movements from around the world. They believed that guerrilla warfare could be an effective strategy for social change, and that small groups of armed people could lead that change. Their politics were also informed by the struggles for self-determination around the world in places like Vietnam, Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, South Africa, and Mozambique. After the Black Panthers were founded, Newton and Seal outlined the group's agenda, philosophical views, and political objectives in their 10-point program. The program's objectives state: 1. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities. 2. We want full employment for our people. 3. We want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our Black and oppressed communities. 4. We want decent housing, fit for the shelter of human beings. 5. We want decent education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society. 6. We want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. 7. We want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people, other people of color, and all oppressed people inside the United States. 8. We want an immediate end to all wars of aggression. 9. We want freedom for all Black and oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, military prisons, and jails. We want trials by a jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country. And 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. After creating this 10-point platform, they decided on a name, borrowing from the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Lowndes County, Alabama, a political group that used the image of the Black Panther in their materials and was led by activists including Stokely Carmichael and John Hewlett. In addition to their 10-point program, the Black Panthers were also actively engaged in their community through a number of social programs that looked to pool collective resources and support the Black community. This group of programs served as a rallying cry and human rights manifesto, aiming to correct centuries of harm inflicted on all oppressed people. The Black Panthers' vision was at once practical, demanding things like health care and housing, while simultaneously being revolutionary in its scope. Among their most popular programs were the establishment of free health clinics in 13 Black communities across the country, and the implementation of free breakfast programs for school children in different parts of the U.S. The free breakfast program that was started by the Black Panthers became an inspiration for the breakfast programs that still exist in schools across the country today. The Black Panthers were also known for carrying unconcealed, loaded weapons and monitoring the activities of local police in Black neighborhoods. As they continued to engage in political activism and social change, their popularity grew across the country, especially in urban centers with large minority communities like Los Angeles, New York City, and Philadelphia. Additional chapters were established in places like Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit, Des Moines, Iowa, Paterson, New Jersey, and Wichita, Kansas. By 1968, approximately 2 years after the Panthers were founded, they had roughly 2,000 members across the country. But the burgeoning political movement that sought to guarantee the rights and freedoms of Black people also attracted a fair amount of controversy, especially as it relates to their interactions with the U.S. government and the police. For example, in October, Newton allegedly killed Oakland police officer John Fry. This followed a period of armed interaction with police officers, since one of the principal tenets of the Black Panthers was the right to self-defense in the face of white supremacist violence. In May of 1967, Newton had sent more than 24 armed Panthers to the California state capitol in Sacramento to protest the passing of a law that would take away their right to openly bear arms. Ronald Reagan was governor of California at the time and vehemently opposed the Panthers, who he believed served as a threat to his law and order campaign. The resulting news coverage painted the Panthers as a militant group and the new leaders of the Black Power movement more broadly. By the morning of October 28, 1967, Newton estimated that the Oakland police had pulled him over more than 50 times since 1966. That morning, he was pulled over by police, and within minutes, Newton was on the ground with a bullet in his stomach. Officer John Fry was fatally wounded, and another officer was injured. Newton was named as the shooter and handcuffed while still in the hospital. During this period in 1967, while Newton awaited trial and Seal was serving a 6-month sentence as a result of the Black Panthers' protest in Sacramento, a member named Eldridge Cleaver, who had joined the group in 1966, took over as the new leader of the Panthers. In 1967, he married fellow Black Panther member Kathleen Neal. Cleaver's critically acclaimed 1968 memoir, Soul on Ice, which told the story of his life and time in prison, sold over 1 million copies within 2 years. Cleaver had studied the work of writers like Thomas Paine, Voltaire, Karl Marx, Richard Wright, all while incarcerated, and this influenced his personal philosophies and political writings. However, there was criticism of Soul on Ice for its depictions of violence and women. Specifically, Cleaver admits in the text to committing serial rape of women, beginning with Black women in poor communities, for practice before beginning the serial rape of white women. Cleaver's admissions in Soul on Ice point to larger societal and systemic issues of patriarchy and sexism, namely the pervasive disregard of violence toward women. And these issues, which were present within the Black Panther Party, would serve as an ongoing challenge for the organization as a whole. Additionally, troubles with law enforcement continued to plague the Black Panthers. First, Newton was convicted of voluntary manslaughter in 1968 and sentenced to 2 to 15 years in prison. However, on May 29, 1970, the California Court of Appeals overturned the conviction, and the next few trials ended with deadlocked juries. The Black Panthers he returned to, even after just a few years, had shifted dramatically in some ways from the organization that he founded with Seal. For example, there was now a growing group of white radicals who had joined the group's ranks, and under the leadership of Cleaver and others, the rhetoric of self-defense had shifted to include an ideology that embraced revolutionary violence. Additionally, the group faced inner turmoil. In 1969, Alex Rackley was murdered by other members of the Black Panthers who suspected that he was an informant. Seal and other Panthers faced charges in New Haven, Connecticut for that alleged murder. But it wasn't only internal issues plaguing the organization. External forces also impacted the group, like the assassination of Black Panther Party members Fred Hampton and Mark Clark by the FBI and local police in Chicago in 1969. See, by 1969, the FBI, under its first director, J. Edgar Hoover, had declared the Panthers a communist organization and an enemy of the U.S. government. In 1968, Hoover called the Panthers, quote, one of the greatest threats to the nation's internal security. Because of this, the Panthers became the target of the FBI's COINTELPRO, a secret counterintelligence program that used to surveil politically progressive groups. But the organization continued to function, with Elaine Brown serving as the chairwoman of the Black Panther Party from 1974 to 1977. She was the only woman to hold this role and often faced sexism and discrimination for asserting herself and leading the party. Gender roles within the party were often quite restrictive, but women like Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, Assata Shakur, and Erica Huggins held leadership positions within the organization, including as editors of the party's newspaper. Still, COINTELPRO agents managed to infiltrate events and the personal lives of prominent members of the party. In the 1970s, a Senate committee led by Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, exposed the FBI and COINTELPRO. As the scholar Peniel E. Joseph has described it, The FBI and COINTELPRO had a, quote, clandestine Black Power, New Left, and anti-war movements, and revealed further evidence of the pitfalls of unchecked government power. Under the weight of internal strife and external pressures and surveillance, the organization officially dissolved in 1982. The Black Panther Party helped to bring Black power to national and international prominence and raised important questions about Black people's right to fair treatment, equality, and self-defense. It's not an organization that was perfect, and it shouldn't be overly romanticized in ways that ignore some of its institutional and interpersonal failings. At the same time, its legacy shouldn't be minimized or mischaracterized because of the multiple forms of state-sanctioned interference it experienced from American intelligence agencies. The Black Panther Party's contribution to the Black freedom struggles of the 1960s and 1970s and today was profound, and that means sitting with all of the complexities that come with it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course is made with the help of all these nice people, and our animation team is Thought Cafe. Crash Course is made possible by all of our viewers and supporters. Thanks to all of our patrons who support the show on Patreon, and all of you who participated in the 2021 Crash Course Learner Coin campaign. Your contributions support millions of learners. Thank you.
You've been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You have to carefully monitor your health for the rest of your life, and you have an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease.
Cut.
Type 2, take 2.
Action.
You've been diagnosed with a new purpose, to fight for the amazing life you made for yourself, to look that risk of heart disease square in the face and say, no, not me. You've been given a new opportunity to live. Get started at NoDiabetesByHeart.org.
This is a crash course on the women and the Black Power movement.
I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American History. One theme we've seen throughout this series is that women were, and are, some of the most important people in the movement for equality. There is a long lineage of Black women freedom fighters that extend from slavery, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement. Folks like Harriet Tubman, Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin, Zora Neale Hurston, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Daisy Bates, the list goes on and on. But that work didn't end with the Civil Rights Movement. Black women continued to lead this fight even when they weren't at the center of attention. The Black Power movement is usually characterized by what men did, but today, we're going to specifically highlight the roles that Black women played in that space and how their work helped to bring us to where we are today. Let's start the show. Listen, the role of women in activism is imperative to acknowledge. It's not just some inclusivity thing we do just because we think we're supposed to do it. We bring it up because it reflects what actually happened. Black women were at the forefront of community organizing and Black thought, both before and after the Civil Rights Movement. The women of the Black Power movement brought to light the significance of what we call intersectionality, which is a way of saying that women experience the world differently than men do because of misogyny and gender discrimination. And then if you multiply that by the consequences of being a Black woman, then you often find that the world treats you even worse. And intersectionality also applies to all different parts of identity, including sexual orientation, nationality, and socioeconomic status. The Black Power movement was a global activist movement that involved three essential pillars: Black community control, Black self-determination, and Black self-defense. Black Power has historically been characterized as being anti-white, but that's not really the case. The Black Power movement was an outgrowth of Black nationalist thought that privileged Black self-determination and pride, but it was not inherently racist in its scope. It recognized the role of white supremacy in everyday society and essentially encouraged Black people to create spaces for themselves in a society that was constantly excluding them from its services, resources, and institutions. Inspired by folks like Malcolm X, the Black Power movement encouraged Black people to stop worrying about inclusion and to start creating spaces for themselves. The idea of Black Power was not a new phenomenon, but it did become more popular during the 1960s. Its popularization stemmed from the decolonization of the African continent disillusionment with the shortcomings of the civil rights movement, and a decades-long trauma of Jim Crow. Many Black Americans were struggling to find social and economic stability after generations of state-sanctioned segregation. While many believed that the civil rights movement did formally end Jim Crow, one of the major critiques of the movement and its legislative victories, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, was that it did not adequately address issues of poverty, housing inequality, unemployment, over-policing, and a lack of educational resources. And these are all things that disproportionately impacted Black communities. And while the Black Power movement was a political phenomenon, it was also a cultural one. It provided a space for Black Americans looking for validation of their culture, affirmation of their dignity, acknowledgement of their beauty and intelligence, and a collective assertion of pride in a world that often devalued them. Many organizations within the Black Power movement have been framed as male-dominated and sexist. And in many ways, this is true. These organizations weren't perfect by any means. Sexism did manifest itself, both structurally and interpersonally, and it should be acknowledged and taken seriously. At the same time, it's also true that women were present, vocal, and influential in the ranks of all of these organizations, just as they were during the Civil Rights Movement and are in today's Black Lives Matter movement. Again, both can be true, and it's always important for us to sit with that complexity, not run away from it. Many women joined these organizations in order to push the men to be more thoughtful and equitable with regard to sex and gender. And the organizations were better for it. The women members were the ones who pushed the group in the direction of a more radical interpretation of what it means to work toward full liberation for all Black people, not just Black men. So let's talk about the role of Black women in one of these organizations, the Black Panther Party, here in the Thought Bubble. The Black Panther Party, originally known as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale in October 1966 in Oakland, California. The first female member was J. Tarika Lewis. She was a 16-year-old high school student when she joined the party in 1967. She participated in their political education classes, attended rallies, and was an artist for their newspaper. She played an integral role in shaping how the Black Panther Party was publicly viewed, as well as how they viewed themselves. As the party grew, more women joined. Some of the most notable women were Kathleen Cleaver, Erica Huggins, and Elaine Brown. Kathleen Cleaver was a former member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, commonly known as SNCC. Cleaver was the communications secretary and the first female member of the Black Panthers' main decision-making body. Erica Huggins had multiple leadership roles, becoming a leader in the Los Angeles chapter and founding the chapter in New Haven, Connecticut. Elaine Brown was appointed the new leader of the entire Black Panther Party in 1974, after Huey Newton fled prosecution to Cuba. Even though she faced quite a bit of sexism during her tenure, she led the party for 3 years and also established the Black Panther Party's Liberation School. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Needless to say, women were a huge part of the Black Panther Party and the Black Power movement more broadly. And that wasn't all of them. There was Charlotte Hill O'Neill, a musician, poet, and artist who was a major figure in the international section of the Black Panther Party. There was Assata Shakur, who led the Black Panther Party in Harlem. She was later charged with killing a police officer in 1973 and fled to Cuba, where she maintains her innocence. And of course, there's Angela Davis, who remains incredibly influential through her speaking and writing and as a mentor for young activists today. Women ultimately composed 2/3 of the Black Panther Party membership across 40 chapters, and their influence within the organization continued to grow. Many of the head editors of the Black Panther Party's newspaper were women, and many of these women pushed the Panthers to include childcare centers for each local chapter. Black women weren't only involved in political organizations tied to the Black Power movement, but also artistic and cultural ones. In these spaces, Black women writers and artists used Black Power ideologies to help express themselves. Through music, literature, and theater, Black women told stories of their lived experiences and outlined how they shaped their political philosophies. Much of this was done through the Black Arts Movement. The Black Arts Movement lasted from 1965 till about 1975. It was founded by the writer Leroy Jones, who was later known as Amiri Baraka. He also founded the Black Arts Repertory Theater and School. Many of the women who produced art during this period were known as cultural naturalists. Cultural naturalists used culture through poetry, novels, visual art, and theater to affirm community, promote Black consciousness, and to achieve liberation. If you read any poetry during your high school literature courses, you may have heard some of these poets. For example, Maya Angelou's work grew out of the Black arts movement. Her most famous work, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is an autobiography of her childhood which addresses themes of Black girlhood, femininity, racism, and trauma. There was also the play entitled For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Ntozake Shange, who was influenced by the Black arts movement as well. Poet and writer Sonia Sanchez was another major contributor to the movement. Two of her most important collections of poetry were Homecoming and We Are Bad People. Her work focused on the highs and lows of the lives of everyday Black women. Audre Lorde was another important contributor to this movement. She wrote many books during this period, including The First Cities, Cable to Rage, and From a Land Where Other People Live. Her books address many topics: her Blackness, her identity as a woman, her identity as a lesbian, and motherhood. Nikki Giovanni is one of the most famous poets to come out of this period. Dubbed the poet of the Black Revolution, some of the most important works she contributed to the movement were the poetry collections Black Feeling, Black Talk, Black Judgment, and Recreation. I feel lucky to have been able to talk to Miss Giovanni about her work and how so much of the work she did makes the work that I do possible. All of these women paved the way for even more exploration of Black liberation and the nuance of Black women's experiences in literature. Much of the work produced by women of the Black arts movement focused on power and agency through the feminist lens to tell the story of Black women in America. Even though the 1960s and 70s can sometimes be thought of as an era in which women were rarely more than secretaries, typists, assistants, and homemakers, the women of the Black Power movement redefined and rejected that notion. These women shaped the trajectory of the fight for inequality, not just in the Black Power movement, but in the feminist and gay rights movements as well. And not only did they lead across these movements, but they forced them to become even more radical by decentering the experiences of just men to create space for the experiences of women and LGBTQ communities. But again, this is not new, and it would not be the last time. Black women have been at the forefront of social movements throughout American history, that there is no doubt that they'll continue to be. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course is made with the help of all these nice people, and our animation team is Thought Cafe. Crash Course is made possible by all of our viewers and supporters. Thanks to all of our patrons who support the show on Patreon, and all of you who participated in the 2021 Crash Course Learner Coin campaign. Your contributions support millions of learners. Thank you.